Namaste and greetings. I, Fiza Mahajan, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav, Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI #Web Policy Talk. We are gathered today for a panel discussion on employment, livelihoods, and union budget 2023-24. This discussion is organized by the Center for Work and Welfare as a part of IMPRI Web Policy Talk Series, the State of Employment and Livelihoods, Employment Debate. This discussion is a part of IMPRI's third annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of Union Budget Financial Year 2023-24, being organized from February 2nd to 7th, 2023. I welcome you all to this enlightening deliberation and thank you for tuning into this discussion. Our chair for today's discussion is Professor Suchita Krishnaprasad, former Associate Professor and Head, Department of Economics, Elphinstone College, Mumbai. We welcome you, ma'am. The panelists for today's discussion are Dr. Sandhya S, Iyer, Associate Professor and Chairperson, Center for Public Policy, Habitat and Human Development, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. Dr. Sonia George, Secretary, Self-Employed Women's Association, SEWA, Kerala. Professor Utpal K. De, Professor, Northeastern Hill University, Shillong, and Visiting Professor, IMPRI, Professor Ranjit Singh Human, Professor of Eminence, Guru Nanak Dev University, Amritsar. Mr. Udit Mishra, Journalist, The Indian Express, and Mr. Sandeep Chachra, Executive Director, Action and Association India, and ex-co-chair, World Urban Campaign, UN Habitat. Now, without any further ado, let us start the program. It is my honor to invite Professor Suchita Krishnaprasad to start the program. Over to you, ma'am. Ma'am, you are on mute.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So at the start, please accept my profuse and heartfelt thanks, Professor Dr. Arjun Kumar and IMPRI for this opportunity to learn from such experts, panelists, eminent panelists. So everything has to be put in a context, and this current budget has had a recent context of pandemic, which we assume that it's over and everything is washed out. But of course, pandemic of this sort, which was just there about 3 to 4 years ago, has left deep marks on Indian economy and society. When the jobs bled and people reverted back to agriculture for some kind of livelihood. The October report of RBI 2020 points out that agriculture was the only sector with a positive gross value addition of 3%, and all the rest of the sectors, including hospitality, construction, especially construction, had the maximum damage done with minus 50% of negative GVA. Hospitality suffered the next, which was 47%. So, and then we had 3 budgets, this is the 4th budget after that. And the first budget, let's say 2021, basically, if we try to see what we tried to do, there were 6 important pillars of the union budget in 2021-22, which were health and well-being, physical and financial capital infrastructure, inclusive development for aspirational India, invigorating human capital, innovation and R&D, and minimum governance with maximum minimum government with maximum governance. These were the slogans that were put across. And basically, if you check on each of these headlines are planning or rather projecting some activity which would be done over a period of 5 to 6 years. So for example, if you took clean air, something like 64,000 crores outlay over 6 years in Atmanirbhar Swasth Bharat Yojana. Okay, or anything, for example, if you take Jal Jeevan Mission for urban areas, it was 2,87,000 crores for the next 5 years, and 1,41,000 crores plus for urban Swachh Bharat Mission, which was again for 5 years. So it was a budget for a year, and many experts claimed that this was sounding more like, a rolling plan rather than an annual budget. So this has been, I mean, it would take too much time to probably to establish this. But for example, if you just add a few more in physical and capital infrastructure, there were 7 capital textile parks to be set up over next 3 years, and so on. So basically, a lot of things had to be done, but they were pushed ahead. The entire capital expenditure structure was pushed ahead for the next 3 to 6 years. And there were comments on this, that an annual budget is actually inflow and outflow of resources of a government, basically planned for a year. And if most of the expenditure is spread over 3 to 6 years, then it sounds more like a 5-year plan. Keeping that aside, and believing that this was a trusting that this was a trust of the government for the years to come. If you go about watching what happened later in the next year, that is the budget 22-23, we had the Gati Shakti, which was like coordination of some 13 to 16 ministries for riverways and waterways and railways and ports, and of course privatization of certain ports and airports given to the private sector, and private sector invited to contribute to the defense. Okay, sectors opened for the private sector like defense and major infrastructure projects and so on. And so now we are into 2022, 23, 24. So basically, if you say the expenditure is planned and the effect is planned for over 6 years, and therefore, if not much has been achieved in a year, we can always say it was supposed to be planned for 6 years. And so therefore, how do I then measure the fiscal deficit? Because each budget, if you see the common points of all the budgets, the common points are monetization of public asset, which we call otherwise a disinvestment in public assets, and opening up new areas for private sector, as we said, and working towards fiscal consolidation, and greater reliance on the supply side policies. So even when, after demonetization or GST, which is like long gone, and Supreme Court has decided whatever it has decided. Now we come to even pandemic and the result later. The problems, many experts said, were on the demand side, but the government had a greater reliance on the supply side, creating investment, providing investment. And the most important such investment plan was that of PLI, okay, productivity-linked investment scheme. And that was lauded as something that would probably take economy into the next zone of takeoff, if we are supposed to use old language in economics. Okay? But 13 sectors that were selected to launch PLI were basically aimed at, they were focused on 13 sectors which would give us export earnings, give us employment generation, and high growth sectors and sunrise sectors, as they're called. And therefore, they would probably have more forward and backward linkages and create a growth potential, as it were, for the rest of the economy. But there are problems in productivity-linked incentive scheme. I'm talking about only one. Of course, much can be spoken and understood from experts like Professor Mr. Chacha and so on, what happened about, let's say, water or Awas Yojanas and so on. But talking only about PLI, if we see, the PLI was supposed to be an incentive given for the final value addition. And most of the industries that were taken up for PLI for job creation, like food products or mobile manufacturing or pharmaceuticals, etc., not much of those incentives, capacity was used, as the data shows from PPIIT, which is on September 22, they have released this data. And so on the one hand, we still have a trade deficit in the external sector. We still have the trade deficit in the external sector, which was perhaps expected to be narrowed down with PLI and export promotion and so on. But probably the parts which are imported are still expensive, and therefore PLI, it happens to be, according to some experts, a lost cause, or rather not a very well implemented thing. Because if I, for example, if I am supposed to be a mobile manufacturer from Taiwan, and India is paying PLI for my every cell phone which is exported, if the fact best thing I could do is probably just send my parts to India and assemble them and sell it, show that this is getting sold from India. And therefore it is, and also what is important, that export price might include my expatriated profits. So I'm probably getting even the incentive PLI also on my profit. So it is possible, and therefore perhaps, I don't know, perhaps that is the reason this budget doesn't talk about the PLI at all. There's no word of PLI mentioned. So last two budgets were talking a lot about PLI, and all discussions were centered around PLI. But this particular budget doesn't seem to say so. Also, economic survey does not mention why it is not mentioned. Coming to, and therefore also there was a dearth of data about what to do. Luckily, this data from department has been, Industrial Promotion and External Trade, has been made available, luckily. But otherwise, most of the things which would otherwise depend on the census data, imagine, 2011 census is what we still rely on. And if you look at when it was tabled in March 2011, and 2021 data would probably be pushed to 2023 and 24. So this just speaks about overall inadequacy of data, and if you don't have the data, it is difficult to work on. But at the same time, RBI now says that the resilient India has now come back, and the consumer confidence has increased. So according to the recent monetary policy report of November, the consumer confidence has increased by 83.50%, investor confidence has increased, unemployment has fallen down, and female labor force participation apparently, we can understand that it's marginally increased, that's what they say. And unemployment rate is, at 7%. And the survey shows that, the last fiscal manufacturing sector was the largest contributor for employment generation. The numbers say a few things, but the ground realities may say, project something else. And in order to know what is happening on the ground, we have these experts among us who would show us, how the livelihoods is actually getting affected at the ground level. So on the one hand, there is this digitization, and there are startups, and there are unicorns, and there's a glorious story of India going forward, industrial revolution 4.0, what have you. And on the other hand, probably there is a other picture of India which is struggling to make it good for survival and so on. So on the one hand, there have been direct benefit transfers after the pandemic. There have been things, but probably they came little too late, according to many. And as of now, in this budget, we are already reducing the food subsidies and fertilizer subsidies and giving the advantage of that saving further to infrastructure. So we seem to be continuously, so the common thing here, or the common leitmotif in the last 3-4 budgets, is going for more infrastructure. So either physical infrastructure or the digital infrastructure, and or roads and waterways or whatever. And most of it, if it is projected to be covered in the next 3-4 years, one doesn't know how to assess the performance of a given budget, because there's always a defense saying that, in fact, for PLI, I heard on a television channel a bureaucrat saying that, okay, only 15% has been used, but 15% was what was supposed to be used in the first year. And so therefore, if you say 15%, and I say 15% was allocated for the first year, it's 100% performance. So the numbers can be quoted and numbers can be thrown at you. And therefore, it is very pertinent to actually learn from people who have worked on the ground. And with this few words, I hand over this discussion for further deliberation to Mr. Sandeep Chatra to know more about the ground realities. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Suchita Krishnaprasad. Thank you, Dr. Arjun Kumar. And thank you, Fiza, for having me here. May I know about 10 minutes is okay, Professor Krishnaprasad, or something like that?
Sure.
Yeah. So from the time frame given. So thank you and welcome to all. I'm honored to be with the esteemed panelists and looking forward to learn their take on how they interpret the budget. And what I'm going to do is to try and limit myself to 10-12 minutes and try within that to give my take on what spoke to me from the budget and where we think the issues which are either disappointments, big disappointments, or misses. From our perspective, I come from ActionAid, so our perspective is not that of a knowledgeable economist. I am not one. But I would give it the take from what is called popular economics, or where people were looking forward or with hopes and expectations to this budget. So that's the way I'm going to be framing it. And whatever I'm saying is a result of conversations that we've had with social formations here and there, even as the budget is being talked of in different cities today in Mumbai. And it's being sort of budget outreach programs are going on. People are also speaking about the budget. So my first cluster of comments is around what Dr. Krishnaprasad, you mentioned, the principle of inclusion, what was labeled here as a Saptarishi principle within the budget. And it took a lot of prominence in the finance minister's speech because it came in right at the beginning. And three things spoke to me quite directly from the budget. And I would try and present those contradictions. The first was the commitment of, and the welcome commitment made publicly to abolish manual scavenging. So the budget went on to say the jargon used or the adjective used was from manhole to machine hole. And the idea that there would be what is called 100% mechanized desilting within the septic tanks in the cities. This is welcome. And it will give programmatic impetus, hopefully, although it's still left to the municipalities to do it. It'll give programmatic impetus to make those transitions which have long been awaited and long been awaited, make them happen. But now if I look at the fine line, and if I look at the allocations which the manual scavengers had, for instance, the self-employment scheme for manual scavengers. Years ago, I worked on it with the Delhi Scheduled Caste Financial Development Corporation, one of the states in this country. But if I look at the allocations, those allocations, they were anyway paltry. But those allocations have also vanished. Now, it is almost assumed that you would have this transition without any financing mechanism for the manual scavengers who are condemned and oppressed into this. So it's not out of choice. Most of them are there, or all of them. They say it's a historical caste question of oppression, of stigmatization. So it's almost assumed that they would now, on their own, without any assistance from the welfare state, find another vocation. What would happen is they would join the large reserve army of labor. What in reality would happen, they would stand in queues of wage hunting and gathering. So this is a big miss. One would have imagined that such transitions from manhole to machine hole were aided and given tailwinds with a much larger expansion of the self-employment thinking, credit for self-employment, loans for self-employment, but also grants for self-employment. You need it to happen to make those transitions happen, to assist the families to get into other dignified occupations from the undignified past they've had. I looked at the second big thing that spoke to me was a saturation of all the settlements of particularly vulnerable tribal communities, PVTGs as they're called. They used to be called primitive tribal groups once upon a time. As an anthropologist, that was a debate. Anyway, so there was a big announcement that this year, in this budget, there would be saturation of all PVTG settlements with full development, with roads, with housing, with sanitation facilities, with drinking water, and so on and so forth. 38,000 teachers were promised to be sort of recruited in Eklavya schools around the country, which cater to tribal children. This is welcome. I actually welcome it. Because this is also a long-held need, and budgets. The finance minister's speech right at the upfront said these things, and this is very nice to hear. But now, if I look at it more broadly, one would have expected, for instance, another long-held demand to have been materialized: the question of denotified tribes, the crying question of denotified tribes, semi-nomadic tribes, pastoral groups, and what were once called the ex-criminal tribes. Now, this group constitutes, PVTGs is a much smaller group. And I do not want to get into mathematics games to say smaller groups should receive lesser importance, not at all. But this particular group is 13%, 12 to 13% of the Indian population, and comprise among the most discriminated communities in India, stigmatized, criminalized. So, and this is a long-held demand. This particular government, I am talking of the BJP government, had set up two commissions, the Renke Commission and later the Idate Commission, and those recommendations are available in public. In any case, these were also placed in the parliament. Now, if I look at it, the actual programming to denotified tribes continues. The budgetary implications continue to be the same 40 odd crores that there had been for some housing and other benefits. There has been a demand of a special component-like program, but special component plans are supposedly on their way out, and that's debatable. But there had been a demand that at least allocate a percentage of budgetary outlays in a focused manner for the development of denotified communities. So I think that's a big miss. It's a big miss which could have really helped and gone a long way to serve members of the denotified communities. I wholeheartedly welcome the announcement made by the finance minister on providing support to under trials, to providing support to prisoners and under trials. I assume they also mean under trials who are in prisons for a long time, who do not have the financial assistance or the bail amount to get out. So I think that's an extremely welcome step, and I kind of sense that it comes from President Draupadi Murmu's announcement the other day that we must particularly look at under trials, and this has been a long-held social demand as well. Most of those people who are under trial, some studies will say up to 77% are from marginalized groups or are from minorities. And I think this is a welcome step that they have. In general, and I'll stop here as far as inclusive development is concerned, this is just an indicative list and I'll move on to other sectors. But in general, what seems to me to be the case, that this whole commitment of inclusion and inclusive development is not met by the same financial zeal, is not met by the same zeal as far as the budget is concerned. It's in fact on the contrary. Now, if I look at, for instance, the scholarships for minority children, I do not have the figures readily available here, but they are in the budget, have been drastically reduced. So what would therefore mean the expenditure on education for children of minorities will see massive reduction, despite an escalating demand. Similarly, if I look at what's going for scheduled castes, the commitments for scheduled caste communities by the way of what's called the umbrella scheme for development of scheduled caste goes only marginally upwards. So I mean, this just to give a few random examples of why the kind of zeal shown in the speech for the principle of Saptarishi doesn't realize itself financially as far as budget is concerned on the ground. And this is quite the situation on the ground. I quickly turn to employment, Professor Krishnaprasad, and then on to sustainability, as you asked. On employment, I think you already spoken to it. We may have come out of the pandemic, but the fact is employment remains in extreme precarity. Numbers may have marginally looked up, Professor Krishnaprasad. You see, the periodic labor force survey, it talks of 7.1% or something like that, 7.2% unemployment rate. Similarly, if I take the CMI data, which was released January, the unemployment rate reported is about 8.3% in that data. There are many, many indicators. Let me not get into, there can always be a lot of debates, but we all know on the ground that unemployment it wasn't brilliant before. So, or it wasn't even rosy before, it wasn't even satisfactory before. But unemployment after COVID or employment after COVID is in extreme precarity, particularly from the perspective of informal workers, but also from the perspective of young people, girls and boys. I mean, that data is much higher than 7 or 8% that I just spoke of. And this, of course, if you go by rural demand, most latest surveys of rural demand are not there. But on an average, it is kind of known that there's a buffer. Workers are looking for employment in a week. Some people would say, some data would say 12 to 18 hours per week. Now, that's huge. In urban areas, about 14 to 18 hours per week. So one would have expected a big impetus on the question of employment. This is not something I'm revealing new or something we are talking new in this webinar. The whole country is talking about it. So in a sense, the one would have expected a much larger public investments into employment. Now, MGNREGA allocations this year give you the story of response. The allocation made this year is 60,000 crores. The allocation made last year was 73,000 crores. But that's not all. The revised estimates presented now talk of 89,000 crores, which was spent last year on demand, basically. Yeah. Now and if I go the year before, it's over 1 lakh, crores. So in a sense, you see a massive reduction. On the ground, the situation is as follows. On the ground, the informal workers groups, the MGNREGA unions were demanding at least for over 2 lakh crore rupees. And just to say to you, other day, MKSS released a statement, Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangatna, and they were saying that and they looked at the data crunching. I haven't personally, but they were talking of 25,000 crores as pending wages from 2020, 2021 onwards. So now if you deduct 25,000 crores from the 60,000 crores that have been allocated, what remains really? What really remains? Nothing. So in a sense, the demand on the ground was 200 days of employment. If I now look at the current data, it won't give me employment for 20 or 30 days basis what the demand is. There were demands for what is called urban employment program, a guarantee, and 5 states have already started it, despite it's not a guarantee. So one would have wanted to see it progress given the situation on the ground with reference to precarities of urban workers. So I think there is a story there, and the story is similar to what is reflected in allocations on social security, what's called social protection. India, as we know, spends about 1.4% of their GDP on what is called social security, what we call social welfare, social security, what others would call social protection. So let alone any idea of transformative social protection, what we really have on the ground is a vanishing situation of social security. If you look at data, and I have some here, the National Social Assistance Program has in fact reduced marginally, though, but it has reduced despite the demand, despite the need for some dignity in social security. Ayushman Bharat has marginally increased, but let's remember only 24% of Indians, 24.4% or 25%, that data may have increased a bit, are covered under any form of social security. Only one of those many forms, which anyway the quantum remains very low. Widow pensions, elderly pensions, it is a joke that you can't live a life with, you can't live a day with those pensions sometimes. Similarly, under health coverage also, you have 55% of the population covered, but let's also remember that's all insurance based. So in a sense, the cover of social security sort of needs urgent and dire attention given the employment precarity. So what is the safety net which is being offered to unemployed workers? You were talking, ma'am, of work participation rates of women. They're marginally increased for sure. The data says they're marginally increased, but there's nothing to take home about those figures. There's nothing to talk about those figures. Yeah. Yes. So one would have expected an impetus to employment for women, and that needed social campaigns, for instance, that needed a bold announcement that we would make an effort to redistribute work at home. so that we would make an effort to ensure much higher impetus into public services so that women can go to work. We would ensure that workplace harassment policies, particularly the activation of LCCs, the local complaints committees, are financed strongly. I know you want to indicate me to stop, but but maybe if the time allows later, allow me some time to come back on the climate question, and allow me to come back for some time on the agriculture question, and finally on the revenue question.
Yeah. So thank you so much for opening up the fine prints for all of us. And we have gone with certain catchy phrases. Okay, so there was Atmanirbhar Bharat, and then there was uh, the 6 pillars, as they call it, and then there was Gati Shakti, and now there is Saptarshi. Okay, so somehow we seem to need certain phrase to finally enlighten people around. So reaching the last mile is one of the goals of Saptarshi, and the way you brought out the question of the scavengers. So announcing one and not having enough funds on the other hand is actually revealing, the content and the intent, so to say. So thank you very much. And can we now move on to our next panelist? Mr. Udit Mishra, over, the general fiscal math, as they call it. Okay, so we have been very particular about keeping the fiscal deficit at around 6.4 to 6.9. And of course, the point that Mr. Chachra talked about, the actual estimates and the revised estimates, that should be another area of research. We give a lesser estimate on the budget, probably just to keep the paper neat and looking good, and eventually the revised estimates go down in a certain different direction. So with that, let us have Mr. Udit Mishra talking about the budget and the fiscal position and the implications that he sees, important implications of that. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Krishnaprasad, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on the budget. Very quickly, let me just tell you a couple of things about the broader picture. First of all, is the nominal GDP growth that is expected in this budget. The budget document says that we expect a 10.5% nominal GDP growth, which means that if you sort of think that inflation would be 4.5%, then you're expecting a GDP growth of around 6%. But if inflation is any higher than that, then you're looking at a sub 6% growth. So that, first of all, in real terms, where do we stand on growth, on nominal and real? And nominal GDP growth has come down quite sharply over the last financial year. Last year, it was almost 15%. Obviously, inflation was playing a big role in that. But that tells you the growth deceleration that is happening both in nominal terms and in real terms. And it is important to remember that the 6% number for growth is important for all of us to remember, because this is exactly, an economic survey said this, the chief economic advisor accepted that even before COVID happened. So that is in 2019-20, by that time, India's potential growth rate had gone down to 6%. Potential growth rate is what you would have without really spiking inflation. And this is starkly lower than the 8% potential growth rate that we had between 2003 to 2008 period, when we were growing at the fastest that we've ever grown. So the context of the budget is again in the light of the fact that we had a slowdown before COVID, then we had a disruption and everything, and we are back to roughly 6 or less than 6 growth rate. The second big story is obviously the fiscal deficit. Now everybody keeps talking about the fiscal deficit, and we keep talking about FRBM Act, but we often forget that FRBM Act had 2 prongs. One was fiscal deficit, the other was revenue deficit, and they had to work together. The revenue deficit had to be 0% and fiscal deficit had to be 3% of GDP. And what was the argument there? That if you kept revenue deficit at zero, which is to say that your everyday expenses were met by your everyday earnings for the government, then the 3% of fiscal deficit meant 3% of GDP can be borrowed by the government and used for capital expenditure. That was the idea behind FRBM. So this whole talk about capital expenditure that we are all talking about right now is the essential idea in FRBM. FRBM is not something that holds back India's growth, holds back India's government's expenditure. FRBM tells you how to spend. So in 2018-19, we dropped the revenue deficit target. We stopped targeting that, which meant that you could have a fiscal deficit of 3% and a revenue deficit of 3%, which means that you can borrow all the money that you borrow only for everyday expenses and not spend anything on building bridges. Now, look at what happened to, so on the face of it, fiscal prudence, and as a journalist, I've also written that there's been fiscal prudence. 6.4 was the targeted amount, and 6.4 is what you've got. And for the next year, you've said 5.9%, all very good, glide path and everything. But look at what happened to the revenue deficit. In the budgeted numbers for last year, that's for the current financial year, last year when the budget was presented, they said that the revenue deficit would be 3.8. In the revised estimates, it is 4.1, which means to say that you are now borrowing, in current financially, you've borrowed more for revenue than for capital. So that puts into perspective. And again, for next financial year, the budget very, happily says revenue deficit will be brought down to 2.9 from 4.1 currently to 2.9. I do not expect that to happen. But then again, revised estimates rarely get the headlines that they deserve. So that is on the fiscal prudence part. Then we come to the capex bit. And here, all said and done, one has to admit that the government has been pushing the capex. So basically what the government has been doing is switching the capital, switching its expenditure from revenue to capital. So I was just calculating, give me a moment, the shift that the government has done. If you look at it from, say, 2020-21, FY21, at that time, capital expenditure was 4.1 trillion rupees. And that was 10% of government's total expenditure. And in the coming financial year, the capital expenditure is going to be 10 trillion, and that will be 22% of government's total expenditure. Now, this is an exceptional improvement. This is a great thing. But and credit should be given to the government, but it also betrays something. It tells that the government is very bothered about the lack of investment done by the private sector. Otherwise, so what is happening is that in an economy like India, where there is now accepted that we have the largest number of poor living in abject poverty, the World Bank data that came out, which showed that we had the largest number of people living in abject poverty. 8 out of 10 people who went down into, that were pushed into abject poverty after COVID in the world came from India. We have more poor people than all of sub-Saharan Africa. In such a country, we are cutting expenditures of the kind that the previous speaker said to fund capital expenditure, which is fine. Capital expenditure has its benefits, but to cut it in such an economy where you are taking away safety nets, it shows the government's concern that, this cannot, private sector is not playing ball. And I would like to remind all the viewers about that episode last year when the finance minister was rather exasperated. The video would be there on YouTube, and asked one of the top industrialists, saying, we have done corporate tax cut, we have done IBC, we have done GST, why aren't you guys investing? And she mentioned, why isn't Hanuman, are you like that episode in Ramayana where Hanuman was diffident about his abilities and was not willing to fly? So she said, who will come and tell you? So I'm saying that capital expenditure is good, but it is betraying some really sad reality of Indian growth. The last bit on the macro thing before I get to my own take on this is the revenue projections. Most people who've looked at revenue projections have said that these are slightly optimistic revenue projections for the next year, because firstly, growth could take a hit. We don't know. There are two factors. One is the global environment being down, and secondly, the monetary tightening that has already happened. That comes with a lag. So just because the RBI stops, suppose later on in the month, doesn't increase interest rate, doesn't mean that all the hikes that it has done since May will stop having an effect. So they will, in fact, are slowly now gripping the economy. So that drag will be happening. So with nominal GDP growth coming down, many of these revenue projections may not be met. And also that last year there was a pent-up demand, and there was purchase in many such matters. A lot of it was imported, and so government could get those revenues. This year it may not necessarily happen. That is the macro picture. And now I want to just spend 2-3 minutes on, since you said that, in the context of jobs, I'll give you a very striking number on employment. We often talk about unemployment, and I argue that unemployment rate is the wrong way to go about assessing India's labor market stress. I would urge all your viewers to look at employment rate in India's case. And the reason for that is the labor force participation rate in India, which is the denominator when you calculate unemployment rate, has been falling. People have been pulling out of demanding work because they are discouraged, because they do not get enough job. It's like the Narega thing that we keep hearing, that if you do not pay them salaries, they will stop coming for Narega work, stop demanding work. And then you say demand has gone down. Demand hasn't gone down. You didn't pay them salaries. You didn't pay them any unemployment benefit, and hence they, pulled out of it. So stop demanding. So my point there is that if you look at CMIE data, I was just calculating, and it's quite a striking number. In January, April, that period, 404.5 million people were employed in India total, out of 944 million total working age population. That comes to an employment rate of 43%, 42.8 or something, 43%. Now, from January 2016 to December 2022, if you come and look at the same CMI data, the total number of employed people over this period from 2016 start and to 2022 end, that number has fallen. 404.1 million. So we have fewer people employed at the end of 2022 than what we had employed or were with jobs at the start of 2016. And in this period, the population has gone up, the working age population has gone up from 944 to 1,105 million. So it is not just, so the employment rate has fallen from 43 to 36.5. That tells you something quite remarkable. That is a scary statistics, right? Fewer people are employed today. And I was looking some years ago, I think in 2019, I did a story where I found that fewer people were employed, fewer women were employed in India in 2017 than they were in 2004. It's scary statistics. So I'm saying that if you look at these, if you look at the right metric, you will find the right metric. It will tell you the stress in the economy. Now, that is the context of unemployment. Now, if you go and do a control F in the budget speech for this year, I've not done it for previous years right now, you will not find the word unemployment in the finance minister's speech, budget speech, right? And let me just read out what the economic survey said on unemployment. It said the unemployment levels have risen, it said the employment levels have risen in the current financial year, and job creation appears to have moved into a higher orbit with the initial surge in exports. So look at the contrast between what is the ground reality and how the government is dealing with it. They're talking about a higher orbit in which the jobs have gone. Now, last point, where I think we have a fundamental problem. I hold a master's degree from Delhi School of Economics. I have read mainstream economics, and on paper in mainstream economics, everything clears, right? Everything sorted. You read a good macro text, there will be no problem in your economy, right? Everything has a solution. But in reality, as a journalist, I've found that there's plenty of problems, and mainstream economic solutions don't always apply. So one of the lovely solutions that we have tried since 2019, this government has tried, and I at least as a journalist will have to hold this, we'll have to wait to give a judgment on this, is that from 2019 onwards, the government has said that India has a supply problem. So it said we gave a corporate tax cut. It was said it was a great decision, historic. 1.5 lakh crores, think of all the money that we are cutting from everywhere or forced to cut every year, this amount of money. And we gave that tax cut to the corporates. Corporates pocketed it. They didn't invest anything. Why? Because they did not find any demand in the economy. And that went back to the same question of whether you're diagnosing the problem correctly or not. Between 2017 and 2019-20, India's growth decelerated from 8.3 to 3.7% growth rate. Instead of understanding that this is a consumption slowdown, government believed ideologically that this is a supply slowdown. So it incentivized higher supply. That hasn't happened. Hanuman is not flying, and we are getting exasperated. And now government is spending more on capex and also finding virtue in that. And the private sector is not coming out to play because it understands there is no point in putting another scooter factory because nobody is buying scooters, because the people who are poor do not have the money. Now we have started another spiel, which is that 7 lakhs se come, income, and you will not have to pay a single penny of tax. It all sounds very good until you realize, look at the tax data and ask yourself, how many people who used to earn, as it is hardly anybody pays income tax in India, direct income tax, how much money you used to get anyway from the people who used to anyway earn less than 7 lakh. So forget all politics. In real economy, the consumption boost that you can get from the additional will not be there. If I never paid the tax, then my being part of a formal system and not paying tax will not increase the boost. So my point is that overall, this is the context. I think we have a lovely idea that we are following, but maybe misapplied. That's mine.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mishra, for taking our attention from unemployment rate to employment rate to start with. And economic survey sounds like a rosy picture on every page almost. And I would like to take your attention to page number 209 of economic survey, if you can, which shows that the regular employment, and into bracket it says not contract, okay, is more than 80% aggregate. And if you disaggregate it, maximum regular employment, just check page number 209. It says maximum regular employment is in manufacturing without contract. And it says that fixed term contract is 1% or less than 1%. Yeah. So if that is so, probably there was no, of course, this is besides the point, this is not part of the budget, but if fixed term employment has not incentivized more employment in that category, which is what many labor economists were saying, and it turns out to be only 1% or around that, then probably that change in the labor code was not essential. So keeping that point aside, thank you very much for actually uncovering some of the employment myths that we have. And with that, and in fact, we were thinking that, especially after the Ukraine war and once again, another break in the supply chain, we thought that India is going to be now the hub of manufacturing of all kinds of things. Probably we still need to wait for that to happen. So with that, we go to Dr. Sonia George. Can we have you? So, yeah, Sonia George, can you come in?
Yes.
Ma'am, please unmute.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Hope I'm audible. Yeah,
Yes, ma'am.
thank you. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Suchita and IMPRI for this very delightful session on the budget. And it was so interesting to hear from our chair and also the two speakers about the real positions of the budget as it is, and revealing some of the things that we otherwise think in a reverse mode, especially on the employment data and rather than the unemployment side. So I think maybe as a practitioner and a person working in the field with the poorest population, especially the most marginalized sections, women, Adivasis of this country, maybe I would like to put or throw few perspectives from where my positioning on the realities of the people, per se the budget that that we have been looking through today. So it was for sure that the budget, especially the present budget, is anchored in a very critical political context. That is for sure, because the country is looking towards next elections, and the government had its way to make it most popular, the populist kind of schemes and budget that attracts people in the country towards an election. But I think it was not so easy as the economic survey and other documents that are available this year, and Dr. Suchita has explained about the focus of the budget for the last 2 years, and means especially in the context of the pandemic, where there were a lot of severe realities that have been exposed in this country in terms of employment, in terms of social security, in terms of sustainability, the sustenance of the most the vulnerable people of this country, and how much it is depicted in this process of containing or including people who are in the marginalized is very important for us to analyze in the context. And especially I think the economic survey, when we look at it has revealed more or less the present socio-economic situations of the country in terms of employment, in terms of workforce participation, and those other kinds of livelihood schemes, livelihood promotion, livelihood incentives that have been, how it have applied to different contexts in the country. And I think maybe it has forgotten some of the things, like just recently we have been discussing about, especially in the context of inequality report of the Oxfam, the widening inequalities that that was revealed as part of the recent inequality report, where we have been seeing, while the corporate wealth and their profits are have soared unprecedentedly, and when you look at the terms of employment or livelihood, it has worsened significantly. That is what we could see with the data that has been revealed as part of the report, because most of the wealth it is acquired in the hands of few, means almost 10% of the population, and the rest are struggling as part of this very few in terms of wealth creation, and also in terms of dignity of living. That is something that I think I would like to propose in the context. And we have seen that the finance minister has very well pointed out the 7 goals of Saptarshi mission that especially this is one of the first budget, she said, as part of the Amrit Kal, that she has been projecting it as that. And then she explained it in terms of priorities as inclusive development, reaching the last mile, infrastructure and investment, unleashing the potential, green growth, youth power, financial sector, etc. But I think as we look at what was the real outcome of the budget, I think in the first step, the capital investments, or focusing more on the capital, what was the implication of it, means at whose cost, means investing more on the capital was done, is a big question that we have to think about. So already my colleagues have said, Mr. Sandeep has already said about the cut in the social sector, especially of popular programs like the NREGA, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Livelihood Program. That was a real cut that we never expected, because even the economic survey projected it as one of the popular project and employment guarantee project of the country, which actually supported most of the marginalized people in the country, especially post-COVID. What we have seen that even most of the migrants who have gone back as part of post-COVID, they have really relied on this livelihood program as part of the MNREG as one of their income sources. That many of the studies by IMPRI and all have really reflected it, means that had been one of the sources. And what was the logic of cutting? It was a huge reduction. More than 18% have been deducted from the last year's budget. That is something that we couldn't accept in the context. And also what we have seen is that the food subsidies, how much it has been cut. It has been even again cut by more than 1/3% from the last year, even though the minister said as part of the Antyodaya, that was one of her first announcement in the budget, as the government fed the people during the COVID. Another 1 year, this is continuing, means to reach maximum poor in this country, the food. But what we are seeing is the subsidy on food, which has been cut, and to what extent, and what are the implications of it. We don't know what is going to happen again in terms of the real poor who are really accessing the public distribution system and who are only relying on it. That was one of the realities when we see many of the families, the Indian poor families, they really relied on the food and dal, the rice and dal, or the wheat and dal that was really supplied to them during the peak of the COVID, where they had no means of income or any means of food supply that was happening. So that is something that we have to look at. How do we look at the context? And another thing that was projected on economic empowerment of women, and that is again we NRLM, the National Rural Livelihood Mission, is one of the base of the economic empowerment of women, especially the rural women. And this what is that? The National Rural Livelihood Mission, the schemes that we have seen, if you look at the schemes of the National Livelihood Mission, that is being reduced, means it has been also underwent so much cuts, like from 113 crores, it has been cut from 126 crores to 113 crores, means which is again a 14% cut. And what is the economic empowerment that we are talking about? Women through self-help groups, or creating jobs through self-help groups, because we have seen that in most of the states in India, women are denied of minimum wages. In most of the programs that have been created out of self-help groups, the small startups or the small enterprises that have been started, in none of these programs women have been earning any minimum age till now. That means, and still they have been, for example, the credits they have been using through the thrift and credit program of NRLM programs under the self-help groups, microfinancing programs, the women had to pay more interest compared to every year they have to pay more interest, and more money has to be paid back, and the credit schemes have really affected the real creativity and skill orientation of the women. That is something that we have seen as part of our experiences that was happening. So I think instead of supporting the real economic empowerment through sustainable livelihood opportunities, there were many programs as part of the agricultural sector have been announced, promoting millets, more credit schemes for agricultural workers, but how do you understand the gender impact of all those schemes? There is no such real analysis on the gender schemes.
Yeah.
If you look at
Right.
economic survey or other things, that those things are not at all properly highlighted in those schemes. And then here we have seen that again, you look at some of the populist projects like the midday meal scheme, that is again reduced. That to a certain extent have been supporting the poor people in this country, especially the nutrition and issues, especially of the girl child in this country. Yeah,
Professor
sure.
Yeah.
I will. Yeah. So I think these are some of the approaches that have been used in the budget in order to we say that as Mr. Udit has clearly said that means the income tax reforms that we have, that the popular media is discussing a lot, means 90% of Indians do not earn an income more than 3 lakh. So whom we are talking about when we have this income tax reductions and to increase the demand of the consumption and demands of the people who will be enjoyed by that benefits in this context of majority underpaid, under minimum wages, and have no jobs, and especially women. One of the most revealing data is that majority of the women who have lost that, 2/3 of the women have not come back to the labor market post-COVID. So this is the reality, and what kind of tax cuts and what kind of tax benefits that we are talking through this, and most of the indirect taxes that have been paid through the most demanding products for our everyday life, through these poor people who are the most marginalized and who are the lowest tier in the tax regime of the country. So I think we have to analyze the existing capital expenditure regime in the context of the social spending, and I think maybe we should look at the budget from a capital expenditure versus social expenditure, social spending perspective, and who it is focused on and what it will be addressing, apart from the Saptarshi and the focus the government, or especially the finance minister, has given in the budget speech. And we look at it, it is very, very appealing that it is addressing the poor of the country, it is addressing the most marginalized of the country. But when it comes to real analysis, it's not so. So that is our experience that we have been when we have been looking at the budget, and that is the reality that is going to reflect post-budget analysis also. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Madam Sonia, for bringing our attention to the inequality report, and which probably is the divide between India and Bharat, as they call it. And I would have liked to see from you, listen to you on the effort that the budget has done on microfinance, and effort that the budget has done on promoting cooperatives, maybe in the next cycle of questions or something. But in the meantime, it's important that you pointed out that when you cut a particular subsidy, there has to be a study behind it. Similarly, when you increase a particular expenditure, there could be a study behind it. Why are you increasing a particular expenditure? Has it shown, for example, if the PLI has shown that it has not actually led to fall in the trade deficit, then there is something faulty in which it has been implemented. Maybe it was conceived in a different manner and it has worked out in a different manner. So similarly, if the capex, a continuous increase in capex has not shown the results, then at least it's a time to introspect and find out, have we diagnose the problem incorrectly, as Mr. Sandeep was just now saying. So is it the supply or demand, or is it first now the demand and then supply? So some kind of resequencing probably would be needed, having analyzed. Also, we are, we are told that, we are aware that global inflation is much higher than the inflation rate in India as of now. But if inequality in India is sharpest, then that even lesser inflation than the world is going to affect the poor much more severely. And with that, can we go to the next speaker, Professor Utpal Kumar Dey? So since your work, sir, has been on entrepreneurship, do you think that this budget is really going to push the entrepreneurship forward, moving forward? If that is the area you would like to speak,
Good.
it would be nice. Of course, your expertise on other areas is most welcome. Thank you.
Good evening, and thanks to Dr. Arjun and IMPRI to invite me, to the chairperson, the Krishnaprasad ji. I think this session will continue up to 5 o'clock or 4:30. Was at about 4:20.
Yes, sir. We will extend. Please go on, sir.
No. Then otherwise I will take only 5-7 minutes because it will unnecessarily not delay. Anyway, so
Everybody has got 10, so let's keep it at 10.
Okay, thank you, madam. So actually, I think I am audible clearly now. Yeah. So every year when there is a budget presentation, and I see that from television, radio, everywhere in general, just taking 1-2 minutes, that there is a discussion on the budget. But why we discuss that very fundamental issues? That it gives a direction what the government intends to do, wants to do, isn't the direction they wants to give. But we never have a discussion what was announced in the previous budget and how much of that was implemented. That because MPs and the people sitting in the parliament and they just thumping on their table when some railway projects in that area is announced, in his area one roadway projects announced. But finally, when we find that only 1,000 rupees was spent, so whether the real intention that is reflected, it is clearly reflected in the budget or not, because it's a general phenomena. So whenever a new government comes, they are king for 5 years. First 2 years, there will be very harsh measure. So, and whenever people will ask why so harsh measure, that middle class people who are the tomato in the sandwich, we can say, or cucumber in the sandwich. So they are always pressed. The whatever corporate tax, excise duty relaxations you give, or the waiver of the loan, that is lakh crores that you write off when they do not repay the loans, the big corporate houses. So they enjoy the budget. And the very, very poor are the whatever midday meal, whatever free bugs you give, they also enjoy. A middle class, when watch on the TV, what is the consequences and logic, what is the science behind it. And we always remain as a tomato in between in the sandwich. So it is like that only. So never we discuss last year what was announced and what happened. So budget is a statement of account that was intended to be on expenditure and probable income that will come from different sources. But after that, nothing materialized. What is the point? That I do not understand. Okay, some indication only, whatever we get. If we forget about the number, people always speak of number and this number is immaterial to me. Frankly speaking, 70,000 crore announced. When we divide per head of the people 500 rupees, and next day gas price from 600 to 1150. So we take away the money in within 1 day. So this has no value, no meaning. Even if you look at the income tax, up to 7 lakh, we are saying they don't have to pay the tax. But waiver is after 3 lakh. After that, calculation will start. So a person who is earning 7 lakh 10 rupees or 7 lakh 1,000 rupees, they are getting 24,000 less than their 7 lakh. So they are being really poorer than the real person who is earning 6 lakh 99,000. Isn't? It is not the tax is calculated from there. If you cross 7 lakh only 1 rupee, your tax calculation starts from 3 lakh. So you are becoming, so better you have to ask your employer, please give me some money less than 7 lakh. Otherwise I will be loser. So what is the science? I also do not understand. And even if we say that those who are earning 10 lakh, 15 lakh, or even 20 lakh, so they are saving will be less taxation will be by 15,000, 35,000. So TV are ready to highlight those. And side by side in Pakistan, petrol price became 250 rupees, 260 rupees in Pakistani rupee, not Indian rupee. And Indian rupee in India, it is 97, 98 or 100 rupee, in some places 110 rupee. So that only we highlight the number. We forget to say that it is in Pakistani rupee. And Pakistan's rupee against a dollar, what is the exchange rate? And Indian rupee exchange dollar, what is the exchange rate? If you consider, there may be no much difference. Or maybe even India petrol is costly. That we never, science we never go by that. We only drum pitting, and there is some 15,000 we got. If you get relaxation of 20,000 from your income tax, even, so whether really you are getting, because your income, your DA was freezed for 1.5 years during pandemic. And first 2 years, very harsh measure. Whenever anybody asks why you took, no, we are eyeing for the long-term growth, capital expenditure, infrastructure, all these things we have to do. So people have to tolerate a little for the country. Third year onwards, some balancing. When fifth year comes, then we are giving many relaxations because next year election. So whether it is for the real socio-economic welfare of the people or for the political. So from which angle, that only discussion purpose we see that this is for growth, this is for industry, this is for employment. But I do not see that, because math of this now, it is inflation 11.5%. So, and that will take away whatever relaxation in the income tax is given to you. Last 2-3 years, through your DA and others, whatever income has been increased, that will be taken away by that, most of that. So that is one. So for industrial growth cases also, so whatever we can say. But I do not know what happened to the digital currency that was beaten the drum last year, so much of this thing. So this is very, and another important thing that that I am taking from my previous speaker, that is about the fiscal deficit and other things. I think Professor Misra was telling that the revised estimate about 7% or 6.9, and they are expecting that it will come down to 4.5 in 2026-27. So actual picture is about 9% of that. Now, industrial growth, what are the prospects? They are given so many relaxations. Why? No, their burden will be less. They will be encouraged to produce more. So there will be more private investment. And once there is a private investment more, so industrial production will be high. So for MSME is one type of policies. For the bigger things, another type of policies that is taken. That for MSME, the small budding entrepreneurs or these startups that we will have another 1 year relaxation from their tax. All these things are given. That and limit also increased to 3 crore. That these are all the things that is looks like as if a positive way that is being shown. But those who are really entered into the startup, in my family, one member also started startup. You go to the bank, that is for startup up to this much, it is the limit. Without collateral, you should give the loan. Interest rate is very high. As an industry in university professor, if I give an undertaking and so many, almost 300 signatures I had to do in that bank, then only some loan, and there also interest is not too low, I saw. So now the question is that on the one hand, after the pandemic, that we are always looking at, the speaker Mr. Ji also told that one, that supply side thing, that you give relaxation, you give encouragement to the entrepreneurs, that will come. But if really entrepreneurs would have come, then government would not have to incur so much of the fiscal deficit or to go for the deficit financing. That means that you are banking upon the same pension policy that government will take care. They will invest more for the infrastructure that will generate employment, blah, blah, blah. And simultaneously also, it is expected that that will crowd in the private investment. And what type of private investment we see in recent times, despite giving so much of relaxation? Just 2 days back, one announcement also came. It's a very good thing that there will be some support to the Airtel and the Vodafone, that they are also running under losses, so they will be given. But the same policy measures we will not take in case of the BSNL. I had written in Economic Times once. Why not given? Now, it is not the job of the government to run the industries or factories or the business. It is private in people. We will only infrastructure creator, all these things facilitator. So, but the private investors like this that from industry perspective, as you are expecting from me, I am telling, they are as employment count also 80% or something. I don't know where from they got it, and in economic survey that is given that picture, because last few years the majority of the jobs are created like informal sector. One example I am giving here, like your Amazon, Zomato, this type of thing. And the master degree holder, graduate people, on the back you take the 60-70 kilogram of the material and distribute house to house, and monthly you get 6,000, 5,000. Like that is a very good job, regular job, because they are doing regularly. Fine, no? So
Yeah, thank you.
So jobs are created, but this year you saw that we do not see much of this. What percentage we already spent last year was announced much below that, from higher education to the lower education. So long-term investment in generation of the human capital. What we talk big, what is that? And unless there is a good human capital, you generate your intention, that industry you are talking, then the entrepreneurs will come forward. Their interest is to take the money, and the recent debates that is going on, how far it is true for the Adani case, I don't know, and where from this money will come. When they make the profit, it is their profit. When they are under losses, government come forward to rescue them. And at whose money? When we give to the farmer 500, we beat the drum, we give 500. How much lakh crore we give to them, and despite that, what is their contribution to the society?
Yeah, Professor Day, if you can wrap up.
Wrap up. So I am telling that it is pro-industry. We are expecting that only one positive side I see here, that is for the environmental friendly some measures. Because they are also told, Professor Misra, that real net GDP growth is 6%, the nominal growth of more than 10%. I see it is even below the 6% if you account the green GDP. Isn't? So green GDP cases we did not consider, whatever damage to the environment. For that, we are encouraging, giving relaxation to promote the environmental friendly vehicles like electric vehicles. So railways also like similar to that, which will be environmental friendly. So battery makers will be encouraged, who will produce more battery, which will be used to run such type of vehicles. So that is okay. This type of some encouragement I see, but their technology has not been developed still to that stage that there will be enough demand for that. It can replace the original technology immediately. It will take a longer time. Something can be developed only, and the digital things that has been developed in the last few years, still that will continue. Rather, your computer demand, your tablets, because now as we are doing our here seminar online, so many of the studies are also, it will continue, and that will replace the traditional mode of the education system. It will become more costly also for them, and that digital divide will still continue. But they are encouraged, those producers of the tablet producers, computer producers, still they will continue to enjoy. But there is a doubt to what extent employment will be generated in such type of industries. So that positive side I see, that is an angle. They have an eye that up to 2030 they will try to cover up. Thanks a lot. Some more points are there. If you want later on, I will give.
Yeah, of course, we can cover them as the discussion proceeds. Yeah. And thank you for your observations on income tax rationalization and what is likely to be its impact on people and their livelihoods, and also bringing out the fact that if incentives given to the corporate sector has not yet given rise to enough investment, it's time to think why investment is stagnant, and probably the answer would be on the demand side. not much on the supply side. Maybe, we are only thinking about certain kind of capital, maybe physical capital, and then at the most digital capital, sometimes human capital in terms of more nursing institutions, nursing colleges, and so on. That's what the government has announced. Of course, an earlier panelist also said that there are announcements and we don't know. In fact, Professor Day himself said that at the end of the budget there needs to be a review of what was announced and what actually happened on the ground. And only when we analyze that will we be able to say that a particular subsidy has been productive and therefore it should be continued or it should be enhanced, and a particular tax has been detrimental, and so on. So this kind of study and this kind of data, if that is available, it might create a better picture for the next finance ministers. With that, can we move now on to Professor R.S. Kumar? And since, sir, your experience on agriculture and non-farm employment is well known, can you just focus on the role that agriculture is given in particular budget?
Thank you, Professor Krishnaprasad.
And maybe cooperatives and so on, which can probably work on the rural development area.
Thank you, Professor Krishnaprasad, and I appreciate the effort of IMPRI. So very good afternoon to all the friends and panelists. In fact, Professor Suchita, I would like to say two things at the outset. One is that there is a need to understand the psyche and the mindset of the government and their policymakers. Not from this government only, but from earlier governments only. One comment of the earlier Deputy Vice Chairman of the Planning Commission was that agriculture cannot give me growth which we wanted. So from this, you can see the psyche and mindset of the policymakers. Second is it's increasingly being happened that policymakers and particularly economists play jugglery with the statistics and accordingly set the statistics to please their political masters. Third thing which I wish to mention is that for the last about 15 or 20 years, a rhetoric is being done around sometimes inclusive growth, faster growth, sometimes more inclusive, more faster, and now Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. This type of mindset and the policy framework probably is misleading the country. And the same is happening with agriculture. Now I come to agriculture and rural area. 66 to 68% is rural population still. We don't have 2021 latest figures. 70% rural workforce, 45% workforce in agriculture, and 15% GDP they are sharing. So you can now appreciate the plight. Now, coming directly to the budget, there is a cut in this budget to allocation to agriculture, Fasal Bima Yojana, rural development, and Manreka, which directly affect agriculture as well as rural economy and rural livelihood. The cut is, in the case of agriculture, it is about 7%. In the case of Fasal Bima Yojana, it is about 12%. In the case of rural development, it is about 13%. And in the case of this Kisan Sanman Nidhi, it is 12%. All are directly related to agriculture and rural livelihood. So you can well judge. Now, not only that, Manreka is the target for the last couple of years. As some panelists, or probably you said, that it is the budgetary allocation to this is being cut continuously, consecutively for the third year. So which means, having seen these figures, what I read from the budget and the mindset of the policymakers and the government is that our food security and employment guarantee is under threat. This is one formulation which I draw from the track record and from this budget. Now then, we were expecting that instead of slashing down budget on Manrega, there should be increase in it. One. Second, there should be such employment guarantee for urban area, which is not there. So having said, no, if you see 32% decline in Manrega as per the revised estimates. And I want to invite your attention to the first year of their power in 2014. They were against Manrega, but they had to continue because of compulsion. This is the hard reality. I think when economists or panelists like this, we must focus on the political economy aspect of the government and the policies. Otherwise, it will be pure economic exercise, which may not lead us to anywhere else. So then, one thing is very important. I listened to FM's speech on that day, and very important underlining was unleashing the potential of market economy. What does this mean? Your new liberalism and the market free play of market forces have led the world and the Indian economy to this pass that we are in recession. Then agriculture is going to be hit very hard. Another point of view which I see is the farmers' agitation, long drawn farmers' agitation, and unwillingly withdrawal of the agricultural laws probably is being reflected in ignoring the agriculture in this year budget and even last year. Probably this. And secondly, crop diversification. Government is pleading for crop diversification since 2010. And this government also. But there is no provision for crop diversification and saving the natural resources, particularly water, like the states in Punjab, Haryana, and Western UP. So these are the things which convince me.
Professor Guman, if you could.
Yeah. Pardon?
Yeah, last couple of minutes, if you can.
Okay. I'm coming to that. So when we see at this, then I think the agriculture is being ignored, and the informal employment which agriculture is creating, and even the Manrega is creating, it is going to be hit. Second, digitization of agriculture and the technology-driven agriculture, it will hit the extension services and thereby the employment. So I think as far as rural non-farm sector is concerned, it is going to not to be benefited from this budget or the policies they are going to hit. And Ramesh Chandra's paper is there in EPW in 2017, where he says that for the last 30 years, there is no increase in rural employment in non-farm rural employment enterprises. So this you can see like this. So there is a need to understand all this in this context. And I would like to say that just by the what you call rhetoric or the popular slogans, probably you cannot feed the what is needed to the nation and employment and all that. And I think I will come to it again if there is any question or query.
Yeah.
But this needs to be understood in this context. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing out the irony that a country which is with a growing population, uh, which cannot afford to ignore agriculture, is probably not paying adequate attention to agriculture. Very recently, we have been talking about inflation in the food grains and food inflation, which has hit all the entire globe, in fact. And if we don't pay attention to growing more food for population, then probably then the following generations may not have enough to really live well. And so not only the livelihoods of the current people who
just a while, ma'am, please.
Yeah.
There are two things. MSP is not mentioned, no budgetary
Yeah.
provision, which was the
Yeah.
demand of the farmers. And
Right.
secondly, public debt of agriculture debt was not touched, whereas we are giving NPAs lakhs and lakhs at 20% resettlement.
Right.
Already
Even the Kisan Fasal Bima Yojana,
yeah,
there
yeah.
are huge gaps,
Fasal
and
Bima
the
Yojana
amount
has
of
been slashed.
compensation that really people
Yeah.
end up with is
So I think
absolutely pitiable.
this
Absolutely
should be seen in that perspective.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you. And with that, can we come to Professor Sandhya Iyer?
Good evening, and thank you so much. And I think we are all equivocally having the same concerns. Where are the people in the budget? And if there is anything in the budget, where are the funds? So I think I wouldn't want to, in fact, I echo the concerns raised by all our speakers. But I would like to just flag 2 or 3 very elementary points, which may seem as elementary, but now they're going to be very significant if we talk about an Amrit Kal era for India. So I'm going to be just placing my points in that regard, not to repeat what has already been stated, but I think it's important. I think if you look at what the World Economic Forum did not even a month ago, it plays a very buoyant statement about repositioning India's industrial and tertiary sector, and perhaps it could become an alternate industrial hub for the world, okay, in the recovery point. But I think what's happened in the last 7 to 8 days may again bring us back to the point of how stable are our industrial investment frameworks available, how statutorily we have well defined ourselves, whether the architecture is right. So I think as a labor studies researcher, as a development economist, for me, the fundamental is that we are living in a time of polycrisis. Yeah, we are coming out of the pandemics. We are fearing that a recession could be warded away, but there is no clear statement from the IMF yet. Every 1 month, we are revising our projections of our GDP growth rate. So we are living in a volatile situation where there is going to be a lot more things happening. And for emerging country like India, or you can say the middle income country that we are located in, we are living in a much more precarious condition. So what's been really happening to us in the last 1 year, because till I don't see what is gone, I don't know what to expect from a finance minister. Yeah, so if I look at it in that sense, of course, the oil crisis has pushed many more workers below the poverty line, which is what my earlier speakers have said. And I think the Oxfam report has maintained that about 1.7 billion workers live in regions where inflation has already outpaced the wage growth. So the real wages have come down significantly. And if this Amrit Kal had to really become more imaginative, I would have expected to see a vision statement either in the economic survey or even in the budget document as to where are you going to take us the next 25 years and what is the vision that entire state would define for us as we go on. I would say it was more imaginary than visionary, not to be unfair with my state, but the fact of the matter is we may want ourselves to become more digitally dominant. We may want to become more green, but can I achieve all of it when malnourishment, undernourishment cases, lack of education, lack of access to basic systems of healthcare, poor livelihood conditions continues to be the undercurrent? I remember when we were speaking earlier also, I was hoping to see a thrust to the rural non-farm sector development and a focus on the MSME segment, which is what is the question you had raised to me, ma'am, and thanks for pushing me to the wall to see the fine prints of the budget, to see what is in store for the MSME. And of course, I would also say that I cannot achieve industrial progress in a context where even my workers and families and households in large numbers, up to 60%, are still reeling under food security and nutritional security. And as rightly pointed out, gender inequalities, and as even significant amount of papers and data has demonstrated that women are withdrawing. So it is not in labor force, not in training education institutions data. You find youth and women equally in large numbers. So why aren't people wanting to come back to the labor market? That becomes important. So I would have hoped to see a vision to bring back people to the labor force, but that vision remains. Of course, there are certain statements about how they would like to get the PVTGs and some more vulnerable groups back into the developmental forte, but inclusive development is not about stating that everything will be made inclusive, but would have wanted to see a strategy which is more pointed towards it. So the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which has always been the slogan of our government, about the world is one family, I was hoping that our country should be one family. And that was where I was wanting to place the inequality and the poverty story. And having seen the World Labour Report and the World Economic and Social Report, which was released by the ILO, we know that the scorecard in the labor segment is abysmal. Yeah, we have about 214 million workers in extreme poverty in the developing countries. And I think India plays a lion's share. It's not even Indonesia, it's not other middle income countries. India contributes to this gap. And social protection covered by at least one form is only 47%. And in our study, which we did for Maharashtra, covering 160,000 households from TIST, we found only 3% households in the rural areas are having any kind of access to social protection. So my micro story is much diverse from the macro aggregates. And when we look at the job gap, and I don't want to repeat what Udit Mishraji was saying, that let's start talking from employment measurement rather than the unemployment. I completely underscore that point. But what is more worrying for me is that unlike the workers across the world, Indian workers are working nearly 2.5 times more than the work that was going on. So if you look at the data that has been given to us, we find that if I compare South Asia, America, Europe, and even Africa, an average worker, the total working hours in fully time equivalent jobs is as high as 678 million, which is increased between 2020 to 2023. So post-pandemic, my workers are working for significantly longer time, okay, as compared to the world average given by other regions in the world. But they're getting poorer. It clearly implies that there has been a significant wage compression. I would have expected that the budget talks about how are they going to implement minimum wages. There's been no statement whatsoever. And that took me to the point of doing a simple word search. How many times have they used the word employment in the budget speech? 3 times. In 3 facets. 5G services, lab-grown diamonds, infrastructure and investments. That's where the word employment surfaces. The word job comes twice in the budget document. Capital investment will drive the growth and jobs. Skills. You have Mission Karma Yogi, which is going to be implemented across center, states and union territories, and the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana, which talks about how drones, soft skills, IoT is going to be used. That comes in twice. So the word skill really does not come on the budget as many times as I would have liked, given the fact that it's the youth problem. Women come in the budget speech 6 times, once in the Deen Dayal Antyodaya Yojana, National Rural Livelihood Mission, where they seek to strengthen the self-help groups, which I think is a thumbs up, because that's where my rural non-farm women's employment is getting shaped. Then you have Mahila Sanman savings schemes, again giving them some additional benefits with a better interest rate. But beyond that, not in relationship with jobs. How does an urban woman in the informal sector come back to formal jobs? How do they get access to social security? Nothing there. Nothing for the women in the agricultural sector who are hidden workers, unpaid workers. Nothing for the women in the fisheries or the mining sector who are going invisible. So again, there goes the problem. We have a scheme, but we do not have the spread. If I look at MSME, of course, they have a set of significant focus, I would say, in terms of how do we strengthen the MSME. But again, as we know what the pandemic policies did, the need to start breaking down this aggregated unit called MSME. Micro, small, medium cannot be clubbed together. Especially as I go further, I'll share the details, especially when you say that the turnover should be 200 crores and up to get some additional benefits. So how do you really expect a micro enterprise to ever get any benefits from a budget? Okay, so I will take the finance analysis as I go further. The much touted Vishwakarma Kaushal Sanman Yojana, which was the statement which came very eloquently in the speech, talks about how they want to bring back artisans, craftspeople, and the creative sector into the foray of integrated value chain. And yes, I'm glad they are sensitive to the fact that a large part of the Vishwakarmas today are also from the SCs, STs, and OBCs group. And yes, we require to provide them a linkage to the digital payment. I think I would like to thank the government to start placing the artisan class back into a public policy structure. Of course, we need to see how it is getting implemented and how it is getting rationalized at that point. And again, there's very little stated about how it can be maintained. Then there is this Vivad Se Vishwas relief for the MSME, where they were talking about giving 95% of forfeited amount to bid or performance security. So they are trying to give some support, knowing very well that the recovery of our industrial sector, and when I'm using the word industry, I would like to say all kinds of activities which are non-agriculture in nature. So even the services sector, the transport sector, the retail, the kirana shops, everything comes under this shop. So we are not just going to be narrowly looking at industry as the manufacturing sector alone. But I wonder why we would like to go in a very technocratic sense, even when we want to give them a relief. There is a statement which talks about allocate resources and provide financing for MSMEs on the basis of result-based. How do you think a micro enterprise segment can start qualifying for a result-based evaluation to get benefits of public subsidies? I was fundamentally worried about whether they understand the input-based structure before we get into result-based. So it's becoming a very technocratic exercise, I feel, and they would want to focus more on MSMEs, but there seems to be a failure to understand the nuances on which they are located. And this essentially means I'm leaving out a large proportion of non-farm activities in my rural and peri-urban areas. Yeah. The National Apprenticeship Program talks about providing stipends to 47 lakh youth in 3 years, direct benefit transfers, the usual stuff, which is going to get ruled out. But if you realize, our apprenticeship program is not linked to the skill promotion program. They work in two different groups. Again, there is a coordination issue about the conceptualization. But that takes me to the next 2 points, which is basically about, do we understand the character of where are we placing our transformation? And as an economics student, I remember having been taught by reading Vakil and Brahmananda's thesis of wage goods. Had the budget also just not focused on Vishwakarma, but also looked at the wage goods sectors and aligned them together. The moment we start doing that, we start looking at integrating the micro enterprises in a better way. Because my wages are not going to be dependent on the number of sales of ACs and cars or the other kinds of luxury items, but by the wage goods segments where the volatility is very high. And that's where the MSME definition needs to be revisited. Can we start talking about providing better collateral-free guarantees, not just for a certain type of understanding of MSME, but also those which define people's real lives and real well-being? And when I'm using the word real, I'm talking about how do we secure their lives against price volatility. Let's look at what's going on in the financing track, therefore. And without repeating too much about the big numbers, I would start focusing on the failing numbers. The failing number story is as follows, that even as the total expenditure in the public exchequer seems to have increased in our budget from close to about 37,000 crores to 75,000 crores since 2015 to 2021-22, it has been increasing at a decreasing rate. Every 2 years, it has been dropping at a rate of 13%. Then in 2018, from 13 to 11%. Then there was a marginal improvement when the GST collections got up, government started spending more. But this year's figures have dropped by about 7%. So the budget estimates are much lower than what was being stated. And I'm quoting the chapter from the economic survey where they have allocated significantly lower resources than what we would have expected. That essentially means that what we would have expected in an economic recovery or in a transition mode, this is the point where we find allocations to education, health coming down, which is what may be spoken in the subsequent webinars, which IMPRI has already organized. So I will not repeat that, but I would want to focus more on what concerns labor and labor welfare. The allocations to labor and labor-related sectors has dropped down by nearly half in the last 3 years, from 25,000 crores to 13,000 crores. And in this, the skill development program allocations have come down to as low as 11,000 crores, which essentially means and that's the prominent flagship program of the Labor Department, which has been given the least allocation. Social security allocations have improved by about 3.5%. Rural development allocations have come down. Agriculture, urban development, and most critically, village and small industries allocations has improved only by about 6.5%, which largely takes me to the point of what are we really trying to achieve when we talk about transformation in the economy. The reason why this becomes crucial is that we have just started implementing the eShram portal. We have just started getting more workers registered into social security protection. And at each point that you look at the data that is coming to us, you find that the coverage has increased, but the allocation has come down, which essentially means when we are going to the bottom of the pyramid, there is going to be a lag in the way they're going to get any kind of financial budgets or subsidy for their own ailments, be it in the form of ESICs, EPFs, or any of the large-scale schemes that they have been promised. Therefore, the budget, I wouldn't come with a scorecard of being 4 out of 10 or 5 out of 10, etc., etc. But the fact of the matter is, I can't even come back with the confidence statements that the budget has the intent but not the content. I find some content, very little intent, and a very dismal approach in the sense when it comes to labor, I cannot assume that my labor is going to have any welfare for the next few years because allocation seems to be becoming more and more paltry as we go year on year. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that clarity and a very clear statement at the end. Given your professional expertise on labor and MSMEs and so on, your point about the importance of wage goods is very well taken. And the fact that there are several issues regarding labor. That we are working for a longer time, but we are not supposed to be employable at the same time. So the employability is an issue, but we still work for a long time. So there are many paradoxes in the labor market, actually. So apart from the rigidities that we talk about, so there are many paradoxes. And coming to the wage goods, I came across a very interesting article, which is a study in China. In fact, I was trying to see in this monetarism and fiscalism, the demand side and the supply side economics, we're trying to see whether other countries have done well with demand side economics. Which are the other countries right now? Since the whole thing is about neoliberalism, are there any countries which have done well with fiscal stimulus rather than simply incentivizing? So in that, I found this article, which is about fiscal expenditure on farms and livelihood capital in the ethnic minorities of mountainous region in China. Okay, so a difficult region in China, not coastal and therefore not rich. Okay, but not coastal region, mainland and mountainous region, and on ethnic minorities, the vulnerable groups. And the paper says that it's a fiscal stimulus. Basically, they define capital as not just physical capital and not just human capital, but also as livelihood capital,
Absolutely.
which is what the wage goods would be, I think.
Exactly.
So capital widens to include the wage goods as livelihood capital, and then of course financial capital and so on and so forth. And so the paper very clearly and beautifully brings out how the fiscal stimulus through livelihood capital is likely to improve the living experience, and the quality of life and the dignity of life that we all talk about. So thank you very much for that. And so thank you very much for covering Vishwakarma, which is a recent thing. And hopefully it will see better days than what we generally have experienced. With that, do we have time, Professor Arjun Kumar, for everybody to just round up,
Yes,
or
yes, yes. We can go
take
to
questions? Are there any questions there?
no, ma'am. But let everyone finish their what they have thought to come up with. So we can go to each one of them.
Yeah, I think Udit Mishra has already left.
Has left, but Sandeep sir had quite a few things to say.
Yeah. So please go ahead, Professor.
No, thank you. I probably won't be a professor in this life,
No,
but
no, I thought it was Professor Kumar.
yeah.
Sorry.
No,
Yeah.
go ahead. If Professor Kumar wants to speak, maybe
No, go ahead because you started.
No,
so.
I think
Please go ahead.
it was
Please go ahead.
wonderful listening to you and your interpretations, Professor Krishnaprasad. But also, I quite inspired by listening to other speakers, Mr. Udit Mishra, his point on employment rather than unemployment only, but also his uncovering of data. And I was just listening to Dr. Sandhya Iyer, appreciate very much, but also all the other speakers, Sonia Ji, Professor Guman. I just want to make one additional point, or rather two, very quickly. And I think some things I like about the budget in this instance. And one of the things I like about the budget is at least the vocalization of the green transitions. So at a lot of places, I mean, finances is another matter, as I already said. But as far as whether Dr. Iyer, whether I can call it intent or not, but at least a public messaging with reference to green transitions, with reference to climate, a range of programs were announced quite upfront, and some of them are pretty innovative thoughts. Let's hope they unravel. Let's hope they unravel on the ground with money behind it, and let's hope they unravel on the ground with substance in it. So this whole question of transitions to Mother Nature, the question of Mother Nature, I think it's been spoken importantly. The PM Pranam program, the Amrit Dharohar program, the LIFE program, the Energy Transitions program, the capital investments towards net zero, all these are welcome. The question of liquid hydrogen, which is $1 billion or more than $1 billion investment, needs some more interrogation and debate of what kind of impact it will have eventually. But what I do want to talk is about the big expectation we all had. Since we were talking of farmers, Professor Ghuman was speaking to that, workers, and all the working peoples of India, the pastoralists, the fisher folk, Dr. Iyer, you mentioned, but indigenous people, of course, the de-notified tribes that I spoke of. The bigger question for them is the loss they are suffering on account of climate change, exacerbated losses, loss of wages, rising expenditures, contraction of what they could consume. This is what I see on the ground. We work with these communities, yeah, and loss of habitations, and no, no ideas to compensate those losses, ongoing, multiplied several times over the last decades, have been even touched on in this budget. What I did note was one reference to what has been argued for a long time, that let's recognize communities at the front line as ecological defenders, the what is called ecological justice defenders, who have a huge role in serving the upper classes and wealth accumulation on the other side, by actually taking care of nature. So that was mentioned under the Mishti program, the Mangrove Initiative, but also the revival of Ramsar program in the budget. So I think that's welcome. But this budget completely missed on what would have been a game changer, an announcement with reference to institutionalizing a mechanism for assessment of loss and damage, financing loss and damage, and having an institutional system to actually compensate the ongoing losses workers and peasants in particular, but all the working peoples are facing, the informal workers in particular. So I think that was missed. What I also welcomed was this announcement on expanding what are considered millets in the public procurement system. So adding Ramsar, Ramdana, adding Kutu, and so on and so forth, Jawar, Bajra. This is welcome. But if you look at the offtake in the public procurement system, it is extremely low. At some time ago, it was 1%. So in a sense, this is important messaging, public messaging, but one would have expected actually a bold new thought of, it isn't entirely new, but at least for the announcement, it would have been new, of additional valuation to crops which are ecologically produced at the farm grade level. That would incentivize the transitions which were majorly being talked of. And I would have also thought that in that sort of sense, this whole initiative, which was celebrated last year, if you remember, the organic farming around Ganges, some kilometers on both banks of River Ganga, I would have wanted or hoped that this whole initiative was talked of, reported back on a little bit, discussed and expanded for future. So I think on the whole, on the climate aspect, the sustainability aspect, green transitions within cities were missed out. But on the sustainability aspect, they were very good in at least announcements. But if I look at the budget side, there are huge gaps there. So that's how I would like to assess. One last quick thing on the question of revenues, since Mr. Misra has spoken to it in detail, then I concur with every single point he made. You see, the point about revenues is expanding revenues. What seems to have been done in this budget is reallocation of what is there. So tax waivers have been given. How much impact they'll have, that was already discussed here. But in a sense, 35,000 crores is revenues foregone. That this is the finance minister's speech herself in this tax structure changes that have been proposed. Now, in terms of revenues foregone, I think one worrying fact, and Mr. Misra touched on it, is the kind of revenues we have been foregoing. He talked of corporate tax relief. He talked of income tax and the kind of tax revenues foregone there. But I think the more important, he didn't mention, and I would like to add that, the revenues foregone on excise, a lot of those are with reference to free trade agreements. And I think we need to sort of interrogate that data better. And in saying so, we need to find innovative ways of having additional sort of revenues in light of growing inequalities, which Dr. Iyer was talking of, the World Inequality Report of Oxfam, the World Inequality Labs report. One would have wanted or hoped for, and we still hope for it in future, taxation on extreme capital accumulation, or what is in the civil language called, or civic society language called, the wealth tax, to ensure that we tax super accumulation of capital on the one hand, but also rethink this whole idea, which had been mentioned, of giving corporate tax waivers to ensure that more and more money comes into the system, and more and money, while making the middle classes a bit happier, while making the corporates a bit happier. We need to hope that we need to make our laboring people a lot more happier. And for that, these are the ways to generate the revenue. This is what I would want to say. Thank you so much.
Thanks for that additional. Thanks for all those additional points, Mr. Chacha. And now, do we have Professor Kumar?
In fact, there is a lot more to say on agriculture and integrated it to the overall development of the country. but I'll quickly take 4 or 5 points, just bullet points. To my mind, agriculture needs a comprehensive policy to address the following issues. One is transition from agriculture to non-agriculture. It is happening very fast, and the long-term dynamics of growth that is shifting workforce from agriculture and the declining share of agriculture in GDP. This is to be addressed with a long-term policy. Second is addressing the issue of surplus workforce. We have done work on it, and we found that agriculture is pushing workforce out of agriculture, both cultivators as well as laborers. So where to absorb that workforce which is getting surplus, and how to skill and reskill that workforce, that is very, very important if we want to sustain the agriculture. Third is conservation of natural resources, particularly soil health and water. Of course, green agriculture is there, environment is there, but it will take a long way to address the issue of food security, as well as match the output and income from green agriculture with the present cropping pattern. And the fourth is that use of crop residue, particularly in certain areas, it has become a hazard, the paddy straw and all that. And that needs to be addressed not only through mechanized means, but the use of that residue for creating value. Then development of rural non-farm sector is a big challenge. Without development of rural non-farm sector, it is next to impossible to address the issue of rural livelihood as well as sustainability of agriculture. And last but not the least, the consumption-led growth machine and the consumption-led growth model needs demand generation from the rural area as well as from the agriculture sector. Otherwise, this consumption-led growth model will get hit, and already there is a demand issue with the Indian economy. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for those last words, Professor Kumar. And can we have Professor Sonia George, Dr. Sonia George?
I think she signed out. She had
Ma'am,
to
yes,
Has she left?
Sonia ma'am has left, yes.
Yes.
Oh yeah, she's left. Yeah. So that leaves
We can go to
two
Professor
of
Day.
us, Sandhya. Yeah, you were saying something, sir?
Ma'am, Professor Day, Utpal Day.
Yeah. Professor Day, can we have you?
If you like to add anything, sir.
To round up after
Thanks a
you have
lot.
heard everybody.
Since
you would like
you
to-
had asked me about that, whether industrial growth of the manufacturing sector, what will be the impetus for that one? So there I had said earlier also that it is always emphasis is on the supply side, but the demand side is neglected. Now, how the demand side could have been? So where you give relaxation, whether waiver of the corporate tax or if there are any loss-making enterprises, you are giving waiver of their loan and others. So it is acting as if money is given to the person who is incurring losses of individual corporate to buy a bank, so that he will become the owner of that bank and no need to repay the loan again. So the subsidies or whatever to him, whatever means this corporate, the relaxation is given. It is neither reflected in the pricing policy of the product. Otherwise, inflation would not come to that stage. So despite people, there is unemployment, people's income, there's a demand deficit in the market. Why price is going up? Why inflation is so high? Is there any study on that in recent times? A stagflation. So what we deserve? That is even after the pandemic situation. Now the condition is that instead of giving one corporate that facility, if there is a market demand, if there is a profit, they will automatically come forward. You cannot do by force. So despite giving so many concessions, the whatever infrastructure, the housing and other sectors came, so they are unsold still now. You can see there is a very little price escalation. This is a loss making. that is in a construction sector last 2-3 years. So that is, so here also like this, rather, if this money is given to the hands of the general public who are the poor, so where there is a severe cut this year we observe, there could be a demand enhancement. So if there is a demand enhancement that is matching with this inflation, already we are incurring inflation, that we are not, that by giving an expenditure escalation policies, by giving money to the people in the hands, so we are not doing any harm, because that will come back to the market, and again through the channel it will go to the corporate automatically. So that money they are getting, whatever is coming from the people, again government is pumping in there. I don't find this contradictions there. So in manufacturing cannot be progressed through that way. Only that I again said that a positive sign is that environmental friendly measures that has been taken, as some other speakers also told, but still our technology has to match with that, whether we are ready to do it. Because whatever, even there is an encouragement, some measures are taken for the organic farming all over the country, but still price has not come down. It is just a luxury of a few sections of the people, that I have taken a pumpkin at 300 rupees, see, just to show the others that you are buying a 30 rupees pumpkin I have buy. But it's a very limited, fully organic state, that is Sikkim also, if you visit, you will find in the market. So is only the reality is different. What is the Iowa, so what is there? So budget, again, I say that last year's budget, again 2029, you will have similar situation. 2025 budget, you have very strict measure. No, you have to sacrifice for the sake of the country. So these narratives will continue, and by rotation it will go, whoever be in the government, not a particular. And this small scale sector, I said that manufacturing, they are also the piecemeal measures. These piecemeal measures will not be enough. You have to have a concrete policy. No need to give them money, rather you give them the scope, market linkage. So that distorted market linkage happened after the pandemic, that has not been re-established yet. So there is nothing of that sort in the budget, any direction that I will open my enterprise. How many people will, just as I gave one example in my family, that one startup started. So online, like your Amazon, online, that through FB there is an advertisement. In Amazon there is a section taken that to display her products like that. And then from RBI recently taken that permission, that online payment schedule that has been made there. You can choose a product, and this is very limited. How many people can have that option? Even highly educated person is struggling for 6 months to get the permission. Isn't we say many things in the budget that for the startup, this facility, that facility, but you have to run after even collateral guarantee you have to give to the bank, that minimum 10 lakh, that loan also not given. It is only an IOS. So intention and what is actually to be done, as Dr. Iyer was telling, that is there's a very mismatch, very big there. So that's
Yes, thank you once again for adding those.
Rather every year we should the previous year's budget. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for adding those final points.
Yeah.
Indeed, organic farming might just become a luxurious niche and may produce only prestigious goods and not change the livelihood of many. Okay, and of course, it is a well taken point that national income of India, large component of that comes from consumption, and it's for us to realize that unless and until we do something to boost consumption, which is the demand side, not much can be achieved in the long run. Coming even to the infrastructure and the environment and the climate, which Mr. Sandeep spoke about, the case of Joshimath is very, very clear in front of us. Similar things are now happening in Jammu. So we need to be careful about going robustly about our infrastructure projects and roads and so on, and understand the geography and the plates on which India stands. With that, can I have Dr. Sandhya here to respond, perhaps, because most of the people have referred to your forthright presentation, and so please take this opportunity, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am. In fact, it's been a learning process for me to hear each of the experts giving such critical positions on each aspect of the budget. I'll be giving a very modest last few pointers on what I feel. Budget generally talks about what trust governments have on their own departments. I think that's what it implies. What allocations they devote is what is a priority. Right? But labor department and social security department has always been getting less than 0.03% of total GDP in terms of allocations. So that itself indicates how marginal the idea of labor is in the public budgeting speech of India. I think that personally indicates how poorly we look at labor as a state. So even this budget, we find the allocations having come down. That's what I had flagged a bit earlier. But what I'm getting more and more worried is how are we going to achieve implementing minimum wages if I have to get rid of working poverty? Even in 2020, the minimum wages bill which came out, which was made public, has about 1,478 categories of minimum wages. How do we really achieve it? Yeah. Secondly, if I look at social security as well, we do not have capabilities in the departments to even give labor cards to workers who have registered on the portal. And we know about the vast interstate variations in the same. So again, do we need to develop and invest our trust back in the labor and social security aspects of the country? That's one statement. Then I was also wondering about whether the new age sectors are really the priority for my government. Do we really look at gig economy and platform workers, which is a significant size of youth employment in India? To my dismay, it's not even coming once in the budget speech. And we do not have a scheme for them. We do not have an idea about how do we deal with them, particularly at a time when there's been a technology crash and they're saying it's a winter in the technology boom sector. Jobs are being laid out and workers are going to lose out. And these are the educated, highly skilled workforce who are being laid out. Do we have an idea about how do we want to absorb them permanently? And what are the ideas of labor over there in general and social protection in particular? However, that is not present. So my entire point, which is that somewhere we are using 20th century acronyms in our understanding of the 21st century problems. That for us, labor means a certain entity working either in the industrial sector or in the agricultural sector. We are not seeing that even that idea of labor has become very dynamic. It is changing every few years. And we have no capacity to understand how to deal with it. And with Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, many more people are going to come out of school who are class 10 and class 12 completed. Do we know how do we need to address their aspirations of jobs? We are just finishing some work for Jharkhand government on migration of tribal people after skill development. There is no concept as to what happens when they go back to their states. What will happen to those states when they get into greening? What happens when mines stop? We are only talking about something based on our prior experience, forgetting to see that something bigger is going to be coming in. Unfortunately, labor continues to be in the margins of our concept of macro policy making. And I think that is where I would like to end my conversation. So long as we continue to say demographic dividend, most populist, but most marginalized idea, I don't think we are walking the right path that we are talking. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for once again those forthright statements coming straight from your heart, as I could see. And of course, the demographic dividend, as many people are saying, many of the states of India have already kind of crossed that demographic dividend, and we might not have encashed them at the right time, probably because we have kept the labor always on the margin, want more and not be given more attention. So, but at the same time, let us look at some positives of this budget in terms of, let's say, Vishwakarma scheme. And as it was pointed out over here by Mr. Sandeep Chachra, that it consists of all kinds of people with traditional skills, which are carried out from generations and labeled under certain caste. And therefore, it is not only going to hone their skills, but also probably empower their caste. Yeah. So if probably right now I'm thinking aloud, if probably the Vishwakarma and the microfinance come together, the access of skill and finance, that is how the Grameen Bank worked. Okay. So the skill and finance, when they come together, That's the best blending of labor and capital. And if it is microfinance, the sense of ownership and the trust will be high. Let us hope that, India has been resilient, whether we like it or not. We always stand up on our feet. It's almost like a cat which is taken onto a hide and dropped, and again she finds her 4 feet on the ground. So let us hope that again, as you said, your micro experience and the macro data, there's a big gap, and that is where I feel, that's where I had said about the census. All the employment data we take about from the periodic labor force survey, and there is no census for 3 years. So that's a big gap. Perhaps we can pay attention to, of course, capital expenditure, but we should also pay some attention to creating that capital of information.
Right.
Creating the capital of information. So there is a huge thing about capturing the data and making use of the data for the markets. Okay, but let us have some data for official work, perhaps, and that might help us in the next budget. And finally, closing down, I feel unless, of course, the richest can be taxed, and that would probably help and get a lot of revenue. But I was also told by some expert on this area that if you decide to tax rich, their money will go and land into some other country, because financial markets are now unified. So it would be difficult, and it would be, again, a disincentive for them to stay in your country. Already there is enough data which says that, many rich are leaving the country for one reason or the other. So with that, can we end, Professor Arjun Kumar, can we end this session?
Yes, ma'am. Fiza?
Thank you very much, and for giving me the opportunity of, this is my informal classroom, I would call it. I've learned a lot from everyone over here, and thank you for giving me this opportunity once again.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Arjun Kumarji.
Thank you, ma'am. Fiza, over to you for vote of thanks.
Ma'am, actually, I was having a few questions before heading to the vote of thanks. So, as you mentioned in the beginning as well, and right now, about the census data and the dearth of data. So, I mean, how can we even expect the policies that are coming up, that they will work when the data the government is using is based on something which was like a decade or more than a decade ago? Because it came in 2011-12, but the data was collected even before that. And further to the question, for employment, we generally use the PLFS data or the CMI data. So it is based on the sampling distribution or sample population. So can we expect it to, cover the entire geographical locations of India, and how it does impact the policies that the government frames?
Would you like to answer, Professor Iyer? I think
I'll go after you, ma'am. I'll go after you.
Yeah, but I think India is a large country, and regional variations are only to be expected. Even if you take, let's say, HDI, the Human Development Index, for example. So there's a huge difference between let's say, Kerala and Bihar and other states and so on. So some states will be closer to another country in maybe Europe and things like that, and whereas some other countries may resemble a country in Africa and so on. So these regional variations are there, but therefore, unless and until we survey every state, are we supposed to stop presenting anything at all? That becomes a question. So there are two issues. One is continuously monitoring, and the other is becoming more comprehensive. So there is always, I think, some amount of trade-off over there. So if you go for detailed and comprehensive, you're going to lose time, and it will not be available in a short time. So if you want to look at the short run and immediate impact, then you will have to go for a sample and a PLFS. So if that answers your concern. Yeah.
So Fiza, actually, it's not about whether the data is generated using census or sample. Basically, PLFS uses stratified random sampling, which represents the whole. Okay. And the reason why we use sampling methodology is so that you can get deeper into a particular set of dimension. Okay. So if you look at the census tool, it is going to be dealing with a set of questions which are going to be captured, which you can't keep doing every time in a very short duration. Hence, it is decadal in nature. Whereas when you are doing a PLFS and you want quicker generation data points, you're going to be using sampling. And this is across all states. It covers rural, urban, multiple types. So you don't have to worry about whether it's representing the larger story at all. The problem with PLFS as compared to the earlier NSS employment round is several crucial parameters have been dropped out, which you are not able to analyze anymore. Pertaining to why a worker has left out, what is the reason why they are dropping out of certain activities, what is the reason why, say, subsidiary jobs have gone up. Those parts of those questions are not possible because these are rapid points. Okay. PLFS generates every 2 years, every 1 year, we are coming out with a result on the sample. Okay. So that's the difference between NSS and PLFS. NSS used to give you every 5 years. This comes out every 2 years. It's more rapid, but you can't do that every year. Right. So, and particularly as ma'am was rightly talking about HDI and social indicators, they move slower as compared to, say, GDP data. So you need to be spreading out and doing deeper research. So you require NFS, HS type of data sets for that. So all said and done, the fundamental problem is for the past 11 years, we don't have data for our country and we are all using backdated information to give anything serious. And what is more problematic for development economists like us, we are relying on monitoring and evaluation indicators. So those which are put for schemes and ministries, we are picking them. We don't have outcome indicators. We have only output indicators with us to analyze. So that's where the problem stems. But I think more amount of public pressure is needed for this. We require movements on these areas, not generic ones. We require substantive demand from academia and civil society for data. Okay, that otherwise we are not going to be able to generate the information on a regular basis. So I think that it's a long battle to be done.
Sure.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Actually, there is one more question, and it was basically I wanted to ask it to Udit Mishra, sir. He mentioned about GDP growth, nominal GDP growth to be expected 10.5%. And if we take into account inflation and then fiscal deficit, and it will be much lower than what has been projected. And then again, he also mentioned that the private investment is not up to what the government thought, even in the last fiscal financial year, and might be possible it is what is going to happen in this year as well. And according to the new tax slabs that came in, what I have read is that it is going to disincentivize the people from saving. It is kind of, backing them out from savings. So if there is no private investment, there is no savings going to happen. And according to the model that we study in the textbook, it is savings equals to investment. So then the only component that is left is consumption. So is it going to increase the demand through the consumption side? Because you said it is a production focused budget and not focusing on the demand side. So will this lead to increase in consumption and ultimately to the demand?
See, one saving grace, if one could kind of argue in favor of the policymakers, one saving grace would be that infrastructure is not just for supply side. Once it starts, it also increases employment. But once again, we don't have figures of how much employment was increased with all the Gati Shaktis and all the river projects and railway projects and Vande Bharat trains and so on. What was the additional employment? As Professor Iyer just now said, and we have been saying throughout probably in this session, that you want to start a particular scheme, you expand a particular scheme or reduce that scheme or raise the tax or raise or reduce the subsidies, you need to know the impact. And the impact will be known only if you have seen the data. Okay. Now, if your question is, so what happens because if there is no consumption? Then what happens is consumption, you're going to recession or you're going to stagflation given the oil price rises and, let's say food scarcity And along with that, if you have no employment, so there's no demand because employment is poor, and inflation along with that. So there's a situation of stagflation of all textbooks are now full of explanation of stagflation. So, but one way of looking at positivity of infrastructure, physical infrastructure, would be this, that, raw material suppliers and the people who are supplying labor there are immediately getting some income. But we need to have the data of how big is that multiplier and how long is it going to last? Okay, so that data we need. I mean, otherwise, on the advantage of taking up construction is that semi-skilled and skilled work, semi-skilled workers can be employed there. And so don't need, I mean, that's again the wage goods model or Arthur Lewis model, that you can employ less skilled people over there, and therefore the productivity increases on both sides. Number one, the worker who was not productively employed gets a job, and at the same time society gets social overhead capital done. But once again, we need that data, and till that time we don't, I mean, if the consumption, of course the pent-up demand has gone up, and that is the reason why economy has boosted, but we need to know how much of that Gati Shakti or how much of those infrastructure projects have given rise to employment and therefore consumption and therefore demand for, let's say, two-wheelers or whatever it is, and of course at the same time making sure that they don't spoil the ecology at the same time, as we said, Joshi might have, if that answers your thing. Would Professor Iyer like to complement or supplement this?
What I would like to kind of also make a distinction is that when we look at physical infrastructure or investments in such infrastructure, we have to see it from the medium and the long-term perspective, and not from a short-term recovery. I think what has happened in the last 28 or 29 years of economic reforms is you're invariably focused on short-term recovery phenomena and gone for the low-hanging fruit. So in that sense, I would like to say that the second round of budgets that have come out in the current regime, since they've come to power, their focus is more on the medium and the long term, which is, I think we need to appreciate that, because there is a significant infrastructure deficit that we always been talking about. And secondly, I think that is also a reason why we are able to interconnect ourselves with various regions which were not present. So if you look at the Make in India process, and also look at as part of Gati Shakti, where the highways have been built in a rapid manner, which was never there in the history actually for India. And we also look at the trains that have been, interconnecting the untouched patches. I think we are going to see long-term benefits, because now communities are going to, I'm seeing it from the community perspective. I'm seeing it from the people-to-people connections that were there. That's going to be much, much more. But if this needs to be done, we need to talk about parallel policies. We need to talk about the strengthening of logistics divisions, the transport and communication sector, which is the most informalized in our country. Close to 98% enterprises in the transport sector are in the informal sector. So can we talk about, and maybe in the next envisioning process, that those sectors get a parallel boost? So you have the physical roads, but the vehicles that ply on the roads need to become formal, and the workers get social security. The important part is that while the circular economy talks about the products being in the circular phase, can we map the labor within that and see whether we are dealt with the circular labor over there? How many laborers in the circular economy are coming within the purview of our planning process? The moment you place people into the budget, I think we will get a different response. And parallelly look at what digitization will do to them. So if you look at the very first statement which the finance minister said, that she's going to talk about this Panchakarma framework, where everything needs to be dealt with in the same vision. I would see from vision to action, maybe in the next 5 years, or say by 2030. For me, Agenda 2030 is important, SDGs. How much of this is going to help us achieve the SDGs, even before we talk about 2048?
Right.
Yeah.
Very well said.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am.
If I could just ask one question, and I think this is in continuation to what Fizadi has said. Like Mr. Misra had said that the labor force is decreasing due to a lack of work. And now the government has further reduced the NREGA funds. So would you say that this would further hasten the process of reducing the labor force, or would the increased capex spending, nullify the effect?
See, the point is, where is the capex being invested? Are they in labor absorption sectors or are they in product expansion sectors? Right? I think what we have been doing since 2016 is investing in capital intensive segments extensively. And therefore, to see what will be the multiplier impact on employment elasticities, I am not very confident that my elasticities would have changed so drastically. The nuanced parts which Niti Aayog has been talking about is that now they're talking about interconnecting it with various other production systems, as even Sandeep ji was talking about manual scavenging, moving out of the indignified frameworks in which labor was located to the more dignified mechanization structures. You will find, but the multiplier is going to be slower, because we are not emphasized on capital investments in labor intensive. Did we talk about textile sector? Did we talk about power loom sector? Right? And also, even as our focus has suddenly gone to the artisans, we should have gone to the handloom, handicraft sectors, which are dying in India. I just came back from Calcutta and I know how the handloom workers are reeling under pressure of debt.
Yeah, same in Banaras. Same in Banaras, man.
Same in Banaras.
Yeah.
Are they really having a turnover of 2 crores to get any benefit? They earn 150 rupees for one piece, which takes around days for them to manufacture. So I think we need to talk about manufacturing. We need to talk about labor in a much more coherent way in our policies. So frankly, the elasticity may not dramatically change. It may change for some sectors, but not for the segment as a whole called non-manufacturing activities. It will take time, Jia.
Yeah, and also I feel about Manrega, last year's experience shows us that it was cut once and then it had to be increased. So it seems to be depending on the situation. So probably, this is a loud thinking that I'm doing at this point. Maybe at the concluding the session, it's not very desirable, but I'm just putting it across. Sure, whether we are first putting the fiscal deficit in mind, 6.7, 6.9, whatever, and then working it backward. So then some subsidies are cut and some expenditure is increased and so on. So it's almost like going into a maze from the reverse direction. I want to finally keep the fiscal deficit at 6 point something, less than 7%. And then I do some cutting and pasting and so on. I'm not sure whether I should label it like that, but the fact, this is, as I said in the beginning, this is another area of exercise that we could take, budgeted expenditure and the revised expenditure. If the deviation is very large, without a crisis, without an immediate crisis, then it could probably mean that the budget is made for a particular effect, that, either for domestic consumption or for international consumption, that somehow or the other India is able to manage the fiscal deficit at below 7% of GDP, 6.5 or something. Eventually what happens, as the budget rolls out and as the things are implemented, maybe we'll see a slightly different picture, but so be it, So that could be the thing. So Manrega allocation might change depending on the requirement. And as Madam said, one doesn't know about the employment multiplier and the employment elasticity of these. So with that, can we conclude today's session? Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody.
Quickly, vote of thanks. Yeah.
So as we have come to the end of today's discussion, I, Fiza Mahajan, researcher, IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI, Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies, for today's deliberation, a panel discussion on rural employment and livelihood and Union Budget 2023-24. We are grateful to our chair, Professor Suchita Krishnaprasad, and panelists, Dr. Sandhya S. Iyer, Dr. Sonia George, Professor Utpal K. De, Professor Ranjit Singh Ghumman, Mr. Udit Mishra, and Mr. Sandeep Chachral for taking part in this discussion and enlightening us. We thank all of our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's deliberation. You may also find more discussions on employment and livelihood in our IMPRI Web Policy Talk series, The State of Employment and Livelihood, #Employment Debate, and other thematic series. We are grateful if you are watching us later on YouTube channel or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publications. We hope you continue to join in future to our IMPRI Web Policy Talk. We also invite you to IMPRI's third annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of Union Budget Financial Year 2023-24 being organized from February 2nd to 7th, 2023. Wishing you all a very good evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Have a nice-
Thank you.